Welcome to the, whatever this is, June 20th council work session. And we are going to begin this work session with planning, with your votes on the Planning Commission because that's very time sensitive, and the rest of the decisions about board and commission will address in July when we have a full representation by councilors. So I will let you take it away. Mike?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to reappoint Kristen Taylor to the Planning Commission for a 4-year term beginning July 1st, 2018 and ending June 30th, 2022.
Second.
All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, excellent. Congratulations, Kristen, wherever you are.
Okay. I move to appoint Lisa Fragala to the Planning Commission for a 4-year term beginning July 1st, 2018 and ending June 30, 2022.
Second.
Do we need any conversation about this discussion? Yes.
Move to substitute Tiffany Edwards.
For whom?
Tiffany Edwards.
I'll second. Second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
From the straw poll, it seemed that there are 3 candidates with strong numbers of votes from us, and my intent with the motion making here was to go down that list as it matches to the 3 openings that we have. So I would have put Tiffany Edwards on the list at one point, so I'm happy to vote for her at this point, but again, I was just going down the list in the order I had it.
All right. Claire, did you want to speak to this also?
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to speak to this because Tiffany is in my ward, and typically I...
Temporarily.
Okay, thanks for the update.
She's moving to the right.
Am I being replaced, or is she? And typically, you know, I do favor folks from my ward, you know, for these appointments, but I actually voted for Lisa instead on this piece, in part because I thought Lisa's participation in her neighborhood association and some of the insight, I actually had the opportunity to have a conversation with her about some of her insight into her work with the neighborhood association, and I thought she would bring a particular perspective from that work and that experience that I felt would be of value on the commission at this time. And so I just wanted to offer that context for why I in particular cast my vote in the way I did among these 2 candidates, which I wholly admit I believe either candidate would be an excellent planning commissioner.
Okay, thank you. So we're ready to vote on this. Oh, sorry, Emily. Yes, go for it.
I think it would be really cool to go with who got the most votes already. And I liked Lisa. I thought she brought some new viewpoints with her environmental background, which is so important to us right now, and her mention of equity and homeless issues.
I want to say something.
Okay, go for it.
I also like her background and her values, but I was worried at first because she's a teacher, and I thought, can she get away? But I found out that she had already checked with her principals. If we appoint her, she can get away from school. So she was thinking ahead.
Okay. Okay, so on deck, oh, Chris, go for it.
Yeah, I seconded so we could have this conversation. My sense is, and I think Mike confirmed it, is all 3 of these people are going to be appointed, so the order really, I don't think, makes that much of a difference. So we can do it in this order, we can do it in another order. I think they're all going to get in, which is the good thing. So I'm perfectly happy to make the amendment, go ahead and support the amendment, do it now. We'll just change the order. It's fine with me. So I'm okay with that.
Okay, all right, great. We're ready to vote now? All in favor of Tiffany substituted. All in favor of substituting Tiffany Edwards in this first round? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, opposed? 3. Okay, so we're substituting. So now all in favor of Tiffany Edwards? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Opposed? 2. Okay, so congratulations, Tiffany.
I move to appoint Lisa Fragala to the Planning Commission for an unexpired term ending June 30, 2021.
Second.
Second.
Oh, second.
Does anyone need to speak to this? Okay.
Well,
Yes?
I'm concerned Chris Ramey also got 4 votes, and
There's 3 positions.
There are three positions.
Back of the agenda.
I know that.
Okay.
Oh, well, there are 3 positions.
3 more.
In addition to the one who's being reappointed? I thought there were only 3 together.
No, it's 3.
Okay, okay.
You're good. You're good. Okay, so Lisa, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's great. Congratulations, Lisa. And then,
I move to appoint Christopher Ramey to
Second.
the Planning, to the Planning, thank you, Betty, to the Planning Commission for an unexpired term ending June 30, 2019.
Second.
any discussion needed on this? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. Congratulations, Christopher. That takes care of that. Thank you very much. Okay. Second item. Mike, do you want to speak to that?
Thank you, Mayor. I will. I've been working with the folks at Beyond Toxics to around this week, especially being Pollinator Week. I have a kind of personal, strong feeling about the idea of protecting bees, and so I have a motion here that will help with a resolution they've been working on and that staff has been taking a look at to make sure it's appropriate. So I will move to direct the city manager to return to the city council with a resolution to designate Eugene as a Bee City USA affiliate.
Second.
Okay. Questions, comments, discussion on this? Okay. Yep.
What does it
Alan?
mean to be an affiliate?
That's the part about all the details of the resolution that staff, there was a strong recommendation that was worked through and is in a similar model to what happens in other communities. Our staff, both in our Parks Department and in the Legal Department, is making sure that we're not committing to something that we should not be or that would be challenging in some way. So they're vetting it right now.
Oh, okay.
And so this, in honor of celebrating Pollinator Week, we're doing this motion today that asks them to bring that resolution back to us at the appropriate time.
Good timing.
Yes.
Good timing. Yes, well done. Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's terrific. Thank you very much for bringing that forward, and that passes. That's great. Okay, we are now ready for our,
And I'm gonna, this was the motion, Counselor Taylor's motion that.
Oh, thank you.
Emailed out earlier, and I'm just gonna.
okay, great. Okay, so, manager? C2, community commercial zoning.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. My name is Alyssa Hanson, in case you didn't remember. And I'm thrilled again to be back here talking about zoning. And today, we're going to talk about commercial zoning, though, so something completely different. I'm going to be giving you an overview of the city's C2 community commercial zone. And this was a work session that was initiated by City Council through a poll that came from Counselor Taylor, and it's intended to provide answers to the questions that were posed in that poll. So just a quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to talk about what is the C2 zone and where it's allowed, where it's located within our urban growth boundary, what are some of the standards that apply in the C2 zone, particularly when it's adjacent to residential. Also be talking about what's the process for changing any of those development standards or rezoning properties that are currently zoned C2. And finally, I want to just cover some related efforts that are going on in the planning division right now. So to start, what is the community commercial zone? Well, it is our most predominant commercial zone. So if you were to, when we get to the zoning map, I mean, you will see it nearly everywhere, and there's more C2 zoning than there is of any other of our commercial zones. And the emphasis really is on community. It serves larger than a neighborhood area, but not the metropolitan area. So your community can come in a lot of sizes. For some of you, you might use it more like a neighborhood, your neighborhood store might actually be community commercial, and I might use it too, even though I live across town. It's really where you meet most of your day-to-day commercial needs. Your grocery is going to the hardware store, the bank, restaurants, your doctor, dry cleaning, getting your clothing, getting your pet food, your favorite coffee shop. So it really covers a lot of uses. Again, it allows for a very broad range of uses, a whole host of commercial uses. It allows for housing. So downtown is more common to see apartments over some commercial. It allows for public and government uses. We, in fact, have a fire station that's on a C2 zoned property. Allows for medical and financial. It also allows for mixed use, as I mentioned. And frankly, there's a whole host of other uses that are allowed. That's where you're going to see hotels generally, and uses like that. So this zoning map is in your packet. The one in your packet shows the tax lots. It wasn't showing up very well at the blown up version. So as you'll see, the C2 zone is kind of that cotton candy color pink. And you can, if you're looking at the map, you can see it really is located citywide. And it's concentrated downtown, along our key corridors and our core commercial areas. There are also some other pockets in neighborhoods that are typically along an arterial and collector street. Typically, if you see an area of community commercial, it usually ranges between 5 and 40 acres. Obviously, there's exceptions to that on either side, but that's kind of the average. And then this is the same map, but it shows the ward boundaries. So you can also see that C2 is found in every ward. And then I'm just going to cover some of the development standards. So one of the questions is, okay, what is the maximum building height in C2? And this is an excerpt from the city's land use code, and this shows actually the C1, which is neighborhood commercial, also shows C2, C3, which is just downtown, the major commercial, and then general office. And you can see that C2, the maximum building height is 120 feet tall. Now that's roughly 12 stories, but it really depends on, how many feet each story is, but I'm just kind of giving you a ballpark there. There's also a height limitation for when it's adjacent or nearby to residential, and I will get into this a little bit more, but there's a 50-foot limitation where the building height actually has to mirror the allowed height in the adjacent residential zone. And so I will talk to you more about that in a little bit. I have an illustration to show you what that looks like. I do want to just first show you some examples of some various building heights so you can understand, maybe what that looks like. You've probably seen all these buildings, but maybe didn't know exactly how tall they were. So I did start with the hub, even though I know that maybe this is contentious for some people, other people love it, but I am using it because it is 120 feet tall. It's 12 stories. It's on, as you know, it's on the north side of Franklin, just east of downtown. It is in the C2 zone. There is ground floor commercial, non-residential uses, and then residential above. This happens to be one where there's no residential zoning around it. This is the U.S. Bank building downtown. I will note, it's actually not in the C2 zone, but I'm using it as an example because it's strictly, retail and commercial. There's no housing there. And so it's about 9 stories, just a little over 110 feet tall, and strictly commercial. Again, this is 8th and Willamette downtown. So the Tate Building, just south of downtown, this is at 14th and Olive. It's approximately 5 stories. It's approximately 74 feet tall. It has commercial on the ground floor. There's some office space there, and then there are condominiums above that, the 4 stories above that. And then in northeast Eugene, it's Crescent Village. This is on the north side of Crescent, on the east side of Shadowview. This is one of the buildings in Crescent Village. There are 4 stories at this site. It's approximately 55 feet tall, has commercial on the ground floor and apartments above. That's another example of mixed use. And then this is just kind of a typical what we see kind of on some of the commercial areas. This is North Delta Center. It's on the east side of Delta Highway, north side of Green Acres. It's 1 story, it's approximately 24 feet tall. It's commercial. You know, these are fairly similar as well. So if you go to Fred Meyer or Bi-Mart or Target, Home Depot, Lowe's, Costco, you're going to see something that's kind of more akin to this. And those also are found in the C2 zone. So really there's, you know, a diversity of building types, a diversity of uses, a diversity of heights that occur in this zone. So this is the height limitation I was mentioning before. So just if you start on the right side of the slide, that's a residential property. The vertical black dotted line represents the property line between that residential property line and a C2 zone property. And you can see there's a 50-foot area where that building on the commercial site is limited in height to the maximum height allowed in that residential zone next to it. We do typically see people use this as an extra setback area. They tend to put their landscaping and parking in it, and so sometimes we don't even see a building within this 50-foot area. I do also just want to note that we did receive a challenge on our application of this particular challenge recently, and it's about when there's an intervening alley. So if there's a residential zone, an alley, and then a commercial zone, we've consistently applied it that 50 feet still applies. And we believe that's consistent with what your intent was when you adopted that, the outcome of that particular challenge is pending right now, so maybe more to come on that or not. So next, just moving on to, you know, what types of standards, apply to development. So one of the questions asked was, are there standards that affect the size of development? So there's not one specific standard that affects the size of development. Really, it's a combination of the land use regulations and then a whole host of other factors. But things that, you know, land use standards that do have an impact on the site would be heights, would be setbacks from property lines and the street. The C2 zone has required landscaping, so outside of downtown, 10% of your site needs to be in landscaping. It's slightly less downtown. Vehicle parking can take up space. So downtown is exempt from vehicle parking. Other areas, they need to decide, you know, parking is based on the use that you're proposing, and so there's a ratio. And they'll need to figure out where to put that parking. Are they going to have a parking lot? Is it going to be underground? Is it going to be within the building? So that affects the size of a development. So does bicycle parking. There will need to be, typically needs to be some short-term parking in front of the building, those hoop racks, and then typically there's required parking inside as well, either for tenants or employees. Pedestrian circulation standards, so making sure that people can get from the parking lot to the building, or if there's multiple buildings, getting from each building to the other building, those take up space as well. And then there's a couple of areas that have a floor to area ratio that does actually make them, in a sense, have buildings that are of at least a certain size. And so those are the transit-oriented development overlay area, which is downtown, and then some of the fringe areas on downtown, and then some of the nodal development overlay areas. And the simplest way I can explain a floor to area ratio is if you had a 10,000 square foot lot and you had a floor to area ratio requirement of at least 1.0, you would have to create a building that's at least 10,000 square feet. So, and you can, you know, that may be 2 stories, it may be 1 story covering the whole lot, depending on where you are. Now, there are, as I mentioned, there are other standards, or not even standards, there are a host of other things that do impact the size of development. And one is use characteristics, you know. If somebody who has a drive-through, that's going to take more space for that. If it's a grocery store, they're going to have different use characteristics than, say, a mixed-use building, you know, close to the edges of downtown. And then anecdotally, we also know that construction type has an impact. There is a kind of a sweet spot at 5-6 stories. You can still continue to use wood construction up to that point. After that, it's usually concrete or steel, which becomes significantly more expensive, which is why we tend to see buildings somewhere up to 75, and then you see a handful that kind of push the 120. Elevators also have an impact. Those are typically required at 5 stories. Those are not inexpensive either. And then the fire code has additional requirements that are triggered after certain heights. So there's a number of factors that play into this. And then one of the questions was about, okay, what if commercial is adjacent to residential or near residential? What then? And we do have standards in the land use code that address that. So first is the building height regulation limitation that I just spoke of. There are also increased setbacks for buildings, meaning they have to be set back from the property line. If the building is under 25,000 square feet, it needs to be at least 10 feet back. If it's over 25,000 square feet, it has to be 30 feet back from that line that's adjacent to residential. There's also increased landscape buffers if the property's adjacent to residential, and there's increased setbacks and buffering for if there's delivery or loading facilities or drive-throughs. And then one of the questions was, okay, so what if we want to change our standards or we want to rezone these properties? So changing the development standards in the C2 zone would require an amendment to the land use code. You've gone through this recently. I'll use Edison as an example. I mean, that was a fairly, I'd call it surgical fix. And that goes through planning commission, and it has a whole host of steps that need to be taken. Changing the zoning of areas zone C2, that would likely require a metro plan amendment, possibly a refinement plan amendment, and a change in zoning. All of these would require city council initiation and a public process. And then depending on the scope and the scale of amendment, we would probably have a public engagement process to engage our stakeholders, to identify the key issues and do possible solutions and review the draft code language. Also need to look for compliance with state law, which I'm going to come back to in just a second. And then there's the formal adoption process, which again, you just went through recently, actually both for Edison and accessory dwellings, which that process involves public notice. Sometimes it needs to be noticed to the impacted property owners, depending on, again, the scope and scale of any amendment. And it's public hearing before the Planning Commission. They make a recommendation to council. Council holds a hearing, considers all that information, and takes action. One of the things I want to stress here that's pretty important is that changing any standard, it's not something that you take lightly, and obviously you take that very seriously anytime you do it. But anytime you do it when you may limit or prohibit a use, definitely raises policy and legal implications that require careful study. And particularly when it involves, commercial land. So as you recall, we recently adopted an urban growth boundary, and with part of that was making the assumption that we would be using the commercial land within our urban growth boundary to accommodate our future jobs. So there was not an expansion for commercial land. Our employment land supply study would need to be reviewed if we were going to make changes to our supply of, either adopt new requirements that would limit what could be done in those zones or reduce the amount of zoning. We need to just, we'll have to take a look and make sure that we can still balance that out in our commercial, in our land supply. And similarly, because the C2 zone really does provide our most abundant opportunity for mixed-use development along our transit corridors, we really need to look on the impact on housing as well, and our ability to meet our needs for transit-oriented, walkable neighborhoods. We would definitely need to take a look at those. So those are just some factors I want to put out there when you consider any changes. And then finally, I just want to cover what our current related efforts are in the planning division. So through the Envision Eugene recommendation and subsequent work that's happening, the council directed staff to consider some potential changes affecting our corridors and core commercial areas. And this is through area-specific plans that would address the unique qualities of these different parts of town. So I think the one that's most familiar to you right now is the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood planning, and that has kicked off, and it is poised to address the commercial areas and the transitions between those commercial areas and the nearby residential areas along the River Road corridor. So that's actually something they are studying. It is part of the scope of that project. That work's in progress, and the early results will be available in the coming months. Council's also directed staff to work on area planning near the university, although not a ton of commercial there, but I guess it depends on the scope of that plan, and then as well as along the Highway 99 Bethel area. And these projects will look at the relationship between residential and other uses, such as commercial, and that transition as well. And then we have on our work plan, the Eugene Planning Commission identified the need to review our land use code standards for that transition area. So we're calling it a zoning transition anywhere there's a residential zone that's next to like a higher intensity zone. So I think R1 next to C2 would be a perfect example of that. And as you could see from the zoning map, there's really general applicability of that throughout the city. I mean, that is a case that does happen more than once. So the intent there would be to look at standards that include setbacks, step backs where the building might slope away or have steps, landscaping, and other building and design standards. So again, this effort is identified on the Planning Division's work plan, but it hasn't been initiated just yet. And it doesn't have a timeline either because, as you know from your many council meetings over the last few months, planning's pretty busy right now. Trying to, work on some of the post-adoption projects, whether it's urban reserves, the clear and objective. So we do have a lot on our plate. We also know this is important, so that's why it has a placeholder. We do really think there's efficiencies in examining this issue, however, is the River Road Santa Clara project, the neighborhood plan there, and I think that could have a lot of applicability citywide as well. So we think that's really a good learning opportunity there and potential to apply that information elsewhere. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop and be happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you very much for that very helpful sort of outline of what we're looking at here. I have Mike in the queue. Anybody else needing I know I'm going to have Betty in the queue. Anybody else? Alan? Claire? Okay, Mike, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that presentation. I appreciate it very much. First question, can you remember off the top of your head, no details are required, but just a time frame, when anyone petitioned and was granted a zone change from any other zone to C2 for any lands in Eugene? In other words, they owned a bunch of land and it was C1 and they petitioned and had it changed to C2. Can you remember a case where that's occurred?
I can't give you a specific case, but just really quick, somebody couldn't just come in and say, hey, rezone my property. It's really based on the plan designation that's in the Metro Plan, which is why it would require a Metro Plan and possibly a refinement plan amendment. I am sure that that's happened. I just don't have a specific case.
I don't remember it occurring for quite some time.
Right.
That's why I'm asking. I think it's those lands that are C2 have been C2 for a very long time, is my sense of it. And so anyone in an R1 lot who has bought property next to C2 would have known that. They knew what the potential use of that was because the C2 lands have been C2 for a long time and clear for anyone to see who was buying an adjacent R1 property, was my point. Could you bring up slide number 7?
I don't know what's on it.
The hub. I just love the picture of that.
Hub, okay.
I think it's useful for us to talk about what we've already decided. This council's already decided it set, despite my strong objection, a housing mix of 55-45 multifamily, single family over the planning period from 15 to 35, which means in the next 17 years, we need, correct me if I'm wrong, 6,800 units of multifamily housing just to meet the number that we projected and now know is under what we will likely see in population by 2035. Isn't that true?
I
6,800?
know it's 34,000, so you do the math, and then I'm going to trust you on that.
6,800 new multifamily units. So when you do the math at the 183 that are in the hub, that's 43, the equivalent of 43 new hubs that we need to build in the next 17 years. That's our goal. That's this council's goal. The interesting number to me is the 8,200 single-family homes, which works out to about 483 homes a year, and right now we're at about a pace of 200 and something. If we radically alter what we're capable of doing in C2, I believe we won't get anywhere near our goals of building enough housing along the plans that we've already agreed to do. So to start this process, I'm a little concerned about the idea that we start to limit what we're capable of doing when we've already set out these plans and envision, Eugene, of what we know we have to do. Thank you.
Betty?
Well, Mike, I don't think that everyone who buys a home knows that there's C2 behind them. And I certainly don't think that they know what could happen in C2. Example in my ward is what they're calling Amazon Crossing. It's a strange name for where it is, but anyway, I don't think there was a church there when people bought their homes, and it was one story. And I don't think that the realtor probably said, do you know there could be something 5 stories behind you? And I don't think everybody knows. That's one reason I wanted this just one of the reasons I wanted this work session, to maybe if everybody becomes aware of what's in their own wards, they can help inform people through the neighborhood associations or some other way of what is possible where. I know the people in South Willamette were very much taken by surprise when they found how tall buildings could be next to their houses. That was, they had no idea that they knew that, obviously they knew that Willamette Street was commercial, but if their houses were behind that, they didn't know that they could suddenly have a really tall building next to them. And I hope we can make I have some proposed motions which I hope might help protect people, but I have a couple of questions. Does the alley count as a part of the 50 feet? I wasn't clear on that.
That is how we've been applying it, yes.
It does. That's something we maybe should change, because an alley can have traffic, and I don't see that as being a buffer. And then we don't require housing in C2 when the bowling alley on Willamette.
C2, yeah, housing, no particular use is required in C2. So they could do housing if they wanted to, or they can choose to do other commercial
Maybe
uses.
Mike would like to change it so that we required housing if they rebuild. But I do think that it's really important that we limit the size where it's, your picture of the hub is very revealing. That just stands out from anywhere. And I don't think anyone would want to live behind that. But I'll wait and see what other people say. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, it is the responsibility of a property owner to actually know what the zoning is around their property and to investigate that, but it never happens. And there's no convenient mechanism for people to find that information out. In my part of town, the university area south of campus was a good wake-up call for people where they didn't know that there was R4 right next to R1, and somebody built a 5-story building in their backyard, basically, and near the Market of Choice on Franklin and other areas like that, where people don't know what the zoning is. And currently, there's no information about surrounding zoning that's required as a property sale. That's my understanding.
I do not know real estate law, but you're giving me the opportunity to plug that we have an online zoning map. So if you want to go in and you can either type in an address or you can zoom to a property, you can see all of the surrounding zoning. If you want to, take it upon yourself to do that research.
Right. I know we've got new tools. I've thought that a requirement to provide a zoning map within a certain area as part of the closing documents of a sale, not just print the map, and give it as part, so people are informed at that point, would be a good idea as part of the information that people got, so they would be informed when they bought a piece of property. Doesn't solve the problem of people lived there for 30 years and have no idea what the zoning is around them, which is a different problem. Another issue that I wanted to talk about is the building height. We had a previous graph that I think staff generated, which had most of the major cities in Oregon and their allowable building heights. And I recall Eugene was a total outlier on that. The only one that even came close was Portland, and in some cases, their height limitation was lower than ours. Everybody else was in the 3, 4, 5, if I recall correctly. Can you dredge up that information? Do you have that?
We'll have to, yeah, I'll have to look into that. I'm
I was trying to
faintly
find it, I couldn't
remembering it
find
too.
it.
I just don't remember how long ago that was, but.
It was quite a long time ago.
Okay.
And I couldn't find it, but I might still be able to. But that'd be interesting to see how we compare to other folks. 10, 11, 12 wasn't even on the chart. It was more along the lines of 3, 4, 5 as the height limitation. And also, I don't know that we necessarily have to have the same height limitation everywhere. It doesn't necessarily, in my mind, I don't think there's a legal problem with it, that it be absolutely cookie cutter, that we can have several areas that have different kinds of limitations in C2, and that would be something to look at as well. And then the final one is I asked for and got a commercial setback work session probably a year ago, and at that work session brought pictures of the Capstone development and other developments where people in C2 built, and other places like the Capstone development, which it might have been C2, I can't remember, they built right up to the sidewalk. Maybe there was 6 inches of dirt between the sidewalk and the building, but that was allowable within, and it looks atrocious. And on West 11th, you would recall those pictures that I brought. It was something that I was trying to have us change. And there was supposed to be, that's the information was supposed to be brought back to us, and it's actually still on the tentative agenda list in the back of things to come back to us. Do you know the status of that? Because that's relevant here as well.
Yeah, we haven't scheduled out on the agenda yet in terms of status.
Yeah, that might be a good place to inject this as well and kill 2 birds with 1 stone, so to speak. That's all I had at this point.
Okay. Claire?
Thank you. So I just have some questions and general comments, and then if we have motions put on the table, I'll want to speak more specifically. So the proposed OB housing development, how tall is that? I know that's not your project.
No, but
518 feet.
I know the problem is that because it's in the Skinner Butte height limit, we're measuring it at mean sea level, so it's like 500 and something, which I know is not the answer you want. It is under 110.
Okay.
But maybe over 80 at its highest
So
point.
not as high as what's allowable in C2?
Correct.
Okay. So just, again, trying to get some scale. And then you didn't speak to this, but along the lines of what Councilor Zelinka was raising, I would like to learn a little bit more about a requirement for setbacks from the street front, the sidewalk. And then also what, if any, requirements we have about parking placement. So I know the redeveloped bowling alley, it's got the parking lot in the front and the building set against the back. And at the, a number of urban planning conferences I've been to, they've talked about in terms of creating a better environment along the sidewalk, encouraging placement of parking in the back so that you have a storefront and activity that's right along the sidewalk. And I don't believe that our code requires that or encourages that right now.
It does require it. That is an interesting situation because it was an existing building that was non-conforming. They left part of the building in place, and so they were able to continue with the same setback.
I didn't realize
So
that.
we do require the building and have parking in the rear or on the side. That is
So if it had been a total demolition of that
Would not look like
pre-existing
that.
structure, they would have had different requirements in terms
Correct.
of where they place their parking lot on the
Correct.
site. Okay, good to know. Yeah, so I appreciate Councillor Clark's comments, even though he didn't agree with some of those decisions and was a minority vote on them. He recognizes that those are the decisions that this council made and the goals that were set out. And again, if we if any of these motions get put on the table, I will have more comments along those lines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Thanks, Mayor. Couple things. One is that most of what I wanted to cover was covered in Alan's comments, but particularly I want to come back to the idea of notification, particularly when you're in the process of purchasing a home or a property, for residential usage and purposes. I think it would be a good practice for us as a council to contemplate the idea of creating an ordinance in which we say that notification of zoning prior to or as part of purchase and sale agreement should be mandatory, because the thing is like Alan pointed out, I didn't go and check the zoning requirements around the home that I purchased in Bethel 18 years ago. I don't think anybody really does. And you don't realize what can be built around you or what can come up around you until you have already been in the house for 5 or 6 years, or however long you've been there, 20 or 30 years, because zoning is not the first thing that's coming to your forefront of your mind. You're thinking about schools, you're thinking about, access to commercial entities, all of those kinds of things that you're thinking about. And zoning is not the thing you discuss with your spouse when you're going out to purchase a home.
We'll be after this work session.
Yeah, we're good. We're moving. I think we're moving in that direction. I am concerned about setbacks. I think that there has been an abuse of our setback criteria in C2, most notably the development of Applebee's on West 11th, and there's a few other ones in the city that have popped up like that, and I think that we need to, take a long look at that in terms of some of Betty's suggestions and in the proposed motions that she has, but I want to kind of vet that a little bit further and see what we can do there. The other thing that I'm concerned about with limiting height in C2 in terms of building is what Mike talked about, and that is constraining available housing supply. I think that, if we get too fine and too particular, we may be doing more damage than doing more good in terms of creating housing supply, particularly in the multi-unit sphere, because I'm looking at the map that you guys put into the packet, and as I'm looking at the C2 zones, I'm seeing a lot of those zones, or the zones being along transportation corridors, particularly Highway 99, and the ability for us to go up, I think, in some of these areas, maybe not all of these areas, is something that I don't want to constrain us from doing. I think it's important that, we have a maximum allowable height right now, and I don't think that it is overly restrictive in terms of maybe your sight line may be obscured in some cases, but, there may be areas, and I think that there are areas within the city that, where this is appropriate. And, I think that, we should be able to try to accommodate as much multi-unit growth as we possibly can. And so I'm not kind of ready to move forward with limiting heights as a solution at this point.
Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks. A lot of stuff was already said, but I want to I want to agree with Greg. I think looking at the setbacks might be something where we could kind of maybe find some areas that could be tweaked. But I think the hub, like Mike said, is a great example. It's on a major thoroughfare. It seems very appropriate for that area. We need to find these places where large, tall developments work with our transit and our other facilities. So I think that's perfectly appropriate. And when I look at my ward, all the cotton candy pink are on, major roads, which seems completely appropriate. So I would not be in favor of making large changes. I do think that Alyssa's suggestion that we look at how the River Road Santa Clara plan comes through. I mean, they're looking at a deep dive into this, and they have a lot of commercial in their area, so I think it'd be appropriate to wait and see what comes out of that, to really inform maybe what other areas could do.
Hey, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, good conversation so far, and the theme that I'm getting is, as we often talk about whenever you wind up sitting at the table, is...
Secondary dwellings? Oh,
Yeah.
They're called accessory dwellings.
What do we do
not until July 1st.
is, how do we manage and what do we do around the concept of change? I mean, the community is changing and is going to change, and how should it change? Can we stop change, or should we manage change, and what should that look like? And I think if we're going to manage change, which is what I think really is the more reasonable course, we have to be very thoughtful and very deliberate and very careful about how we do it. And I think that's what Envision Eugene was crafted to do, was created to do, was to try to figure out how to manage that change. And I think the notion about how we do that, I think, is a real dynamic within the community, because I think there are some people who believe that they moved here in order to not change, and they don't want change following them here, and I can understand that. Others see change as inevitable, and so what are the best places to do that? That's why the transportation corridor conversation has been really helpful. And so I think one of the things that I really want to try to do is to make sure that we are as thoughtful and deliberate. And so I agree, absolutely, we should look to the River Road process for how that's going to work, and see what we can learn from that before we start trying to implement little bits and pieces. I'd like to see it be a part of a comprehensive strategy. And to that point, I really appreciate Mike bringing up the number of units that are going to need to be created. And I'm thinking part of what our conversation is it's not like you have single-family residence at this end and a hub at that end and nothing in between. We have brought up the whole subject of missing middle housing because we don't want to try to build hubs everywhere, but we also recognize you can't fix our growth and our change just through single-family housing. There has to be some sort of a combination or a strategy. And I think this is really what contributes to a very thoughtful conversation about what missing middle housing can do in a host and a variety of different situations. And I agree, we don't want to try to go to cookie-cutter solutions, because I think that really does have an impact on us. But at the same time, clear and objective standards is another side of that dynamic, and trying to figure out how we can be as flexible as we can, but so that people have clarity and certainty around what they try to do. I know this is a complicated conversation. I'm not ready to ask for any changes at this point until I've had a chance to really be thoughtful and deliberate and careful, and have your participation along with other stakeholders in how we get there. So I'm not looking for left field kinds of answers or solutions. I'm wanting to stay the course and see what we learn through the processes we already have in place.
Emily?
Thank you. I think that the setbacks are my most important concern. Capstone sidewalk right up against a bedroom window is really bad. I really dislike it. So I'm really interested in protecting the livability of our community by having some room between, you're lying in bed, I'm walking down the street, there's this much room between us. I don't think that's okay. I, of course, want more places to live. I think the part we need to be the most careful of is where it is near single-family, small multiple family housing. So the hub, which I find oppressive, isn't next to any other smaller residences. It won't look so oppressive once we fill the street with those buildings. But having a bunch of row houses next to that would be really uncomfortable. So where it's a lot of commercial, if we can put residences on top, but I think we really need to be careful of neighborhoods. I hear a lot about we don't want a cookie cutter solution, but I will point to the SDUs, which are getting a lot of pushback about that they want a cookie cutter solution. So I'm in favor of being respectful of different neighborhoods. I know that takes a lot more time. It's much more complicated, but life is complicated, and we like things the way they are in Eugene. They're not going to stay that way, but we can be protective of the types of lifestyles that we value here. So I really want to be careful of the slapped up against some smaller neighborhood situations. But yeah, we need this. The corridors, the nodes, it's great.
Okay, I have a couple of counselors in a second round, Mike and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. I would suggest that there's probably no stauncher defender of the idea of private property rights in R1 life values, the value of solar access to your backyard and that sort of thing at this table than I am. I have argued that point many, many, many times when we had the R1 amendments as an example. But I think many people do know the zoning that surrounds them when they buy their home, and if they don't, they should. It's certainly their responsibility to. So I would say that to those who have purchased something next to C2 and then would later want to make a claim that they didn't know that, I would have less understanding for that claim than I would changes that might be made to zoning near their home and how that affects them. So I'm trying to get a sense of scale from the following question, okay? So I know that it's a very complex algorithm and you can't give me an exact answer. But if these initiatives were passed, or something that was very close to them, what would be roughly the amount of, if we were trying to say establish a UGB right now, and we put this into place before doing so, how much new C2 land would we have to add in order to be compliant with what's required of us? In other words, how much would we have to expand the UGB in order to accommodate these changes for C2 land?
I can't tell you what the impact of.
On a sense of scale, hundreds?
Couldn't even tell you. I don't even want to wage a guess on that. That would take some serious analysis, as I mentioned.
Would you suggest, though, that we would, in fact, then have to add C2 land?
I don't know what would happen if, I don't know what the impact on our land supply would be, if it would require us to add C2, or I don't know the answer to that, and it would take us, looking at that very seriously. But that's not something I can give you even off the cuff comfortably.
We don't know that this would constrain C2 lands and their capacity in a way that would require that.
I don't know the answer to that.
Part of what I think is, what I'm hearing is it may or may not constrain, but even if it does, we wouldn't know what the impact that would be on the need for an expanded urban growth boundary, which is what I think your question is.
My question wasn't about some future opportunity. It was that we decided during last year's final, process for the UGB that we did not need to add commercial lands, that we had enough. I'm saying if we now limit the capacity of what you can do with them, doesn't it stand to reason that then there would not be enough by that same analysis?
It's possible, but we're going to have to come back to you with more information, with more details about that.
And just a comment for me on some of these, if we get them on the table, the piece that essentially expands discretionary approval processes, I would object to quite strongly. I would think we are wiser to get more clear and objective about our approval criteria and quite a bit less free with discretionary standards. Thank you.
Alan?
Yeah, I'm interested in sort of some of the timelines around the stuff that you're already doing and how this is all related and our capacity to take all this on. So we have the River Road Santa Clara. I don't know what the timeline is for that, coming up with some information. We've talked about that. Some counselors wanting to see that. I agree with that. As well as the code implementation citywide zone transitions. That hasn't even been initiated yet, but maybe you can talk to that, as well as the capacity of staff to do more analysis on C2 stuff and stuff that's on the yellow sheet, on top of all the things we've already asked you to look at and do, and maybe the city manager and you can comment on capacity to take on these things. So I'm concerned about that.
Yeah, our capacity is very limited right now. I mean, we have a great capacity in that we're doing a lot right now already. For example, the housing work is actually in addition to what's already on the existing work plan. So I think what we're doing is working hard to shoehorn in the priority items that come from council as they come up, as we're able to. The transition, so the way that it was characterized by the Planning Commission, sort of the citywide transitions from single family to commercial, was really right down there at the part of the work plan that says to be determined. And we've done really careful analysis about how much time and effort and money it takes to do the work that's on the plan. So at this point, given everything that's come up so far, really in the last, I'd say 6 or 9 months, that if you wanted to add something like this, that I would say yes, and we can either have it later in the queue, you can move it up in the queue, and we can identify something else that we can move down the queue. Adding extra resources in terms of financial resources is also a little bit difficult because you've got to have somebody to do the work or administer the contract, and it's hard to hire like a quarter of a person to do something. So there's not much wiggle room.
Yeah, I was just, you got affordable housing, missing middle housing, Vision Eugene stuff, part 2, all the stuff that goes along with that. River Road, Santa Clara, you've got University Area Study, you've got Bethel Study, you've got ADUs, and so all of that's on your plate, and you have what?
And more.
I mean, you just hired someone new, but that's great, but yeah, and there's more things than that. So throwing more at you is too bad we didn't do this 6 months ago. Might have made a different budget recommendation, but I have concerns about that. So I also have a concern about what Mike was talking about. What's the impact of this on the Envision Eugene numbers, especially with regard to commercial lands? And then another question about the legal implications of all of this. And if we change zoning or limit zoning, are we how far down the road do we get in terms of takings and having to deal with Measure 37 and measure all those other measures and dealing with those things by changing all of this? That's a big, giant question. I don't expect you to answer that unless it's a yes/no question.
Yeah.
No. No. Emily Jerome answer. So I'm interested in all these all these different things that are going on and all these different issues, and some of the stuff that gets brought up in the potential motions that Betty's put forward. The setbacks we already talked about. We already talked about all this other stuff. I do think, though, Betty, that if looking around the table, if this were a motion to initiate a land use code amendment, that would probably not fly. But if it were motions that said, staff, go look at these issues and bring them back to us with more information, analysis, and impacts, that potentially could have, it could be a winning motion. And then finally, on the last motion here, if you put that forward, close proximity, that happens to be a pet peeve of mine. If you look up the word proximity, it says close. So saying close proximity means close, close, or close is a modifier of proximity, so that means you could have far proximity. And you were an English teacher, Betty.
The attorney wrote it.
And I apologize for that.
But I may have sent her something from someone else, but anyway, I know what
You
proximity
should not
means.
say close proximity, it means nothing.
I know that.
All right, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a couple more people in the queue. We still have these motions. We do have another item on the agenda, so I'm just trying to be courteous. I see we have Carolyn standing there sitting there waiting for her turn, so I'm not sure how long this is going to take, but just putting everyone on notice. Yes, Greg.
Mayor, can I make a suggestion? This is a lot to digest in a very short period of time. I would be up for extending to another work session or conversation, considering Councilor Taylor's proposed motions. I think that we need to have more time to consider what we have before us and such a dramatic and substantive potential change to our C2 zoning criteria. It's not something that we can just take lightly or take, in a big swath and then, as Alan has mentioned, dump that on staff to be able to, rework and manipulate and do this and that and the other thing, given the amount of work that we've already heaped on them. And two, I think that various other stakeholders in the community will also want to have something to say about these kinds of suggested changes to C2. So I just think that this is a platform for more discussion, not less, and for more careful analysis than currently we have time to do.
Okay, so hold everything. I let Greg jump in the queue, but I have Emily and Betty still waiting, and then Mike wanting to speak. So just wanting you all to be aware of the time frame and the proposal that Greg has put on the table. So Emily, go for it, and then Betty.
Thank you. I understand Mike's comment about C2 is not R1, and just want us to be careful about if you move into a neighborhood and you have a house with some other houses and then you find out there's going to be 12 stories 100 feet away, you might be pretty surprised. I had people write to me about the railroad quiet zones and say, I moved in next to the railroad, but I didn't know it would bother me. So would you now make it quiet? Mm-hmm. So if we build these 12-story houses and then people come forward and say they're bothering me, are we going to budget money to take down the top 2 stories? So, just...
Okay, Betty?
I want to say, I still want to make the motions. You can vote them down if you want to, but I want to make people aware of what's possible and what's not possible. But as for someone who said several people have said we should wait for River Road Santa Clara. The time to make changes is before it's an emergency. It's an emergency if there's a building, if someone gets a building permit, and they can go forward with what's currently legal. We can't retroactively change it. People who wanted to change Amazon Crossing, make it shorter, fewer stories, it's impossible. They could have built it a lot higher even. But so if there are important changes to be made, they should be made before there's a building, before there's a request to build something that's incompatible. And I think people need to be aware of what could happen. including counselors. I don't think that all of us knew until recently what was possible. Probably Mike did, he's saying he did. But, so when should I make the motions?
Let me let Mike speak.
I was going to say, frankly, I think Betty should make her motions because I think this isn't ripe yet, and I don't want to just postpone. I think it should come back to us when it's ripe, but I don't think it's now, and I don't think it'll pass. So I say vote on it. Let's
You
find
can
out.
make them if you want to, Mike.
No, thank you. You go ahead, Betty.
Take it away.
Thank
Betty.
you. One at a time. Do I need to read all of this?
If you look at the way they're drafted, if you read A, it'll turn people to look at their yellow sheet so they know what they are voting on, but you don't then need to read 1 through.
Just read the bold part.
Read the
Okay.
bold. Thank you. There. Much better way of saying it.
Okay, I'll read the bold part. On A,
We translate lawyers.
I move to,
Sorry.
I didn't know this would be this much fun.
Yeah.
I move to initiate the land use code amendments process to make the changes to the C2 commercial zone described in Section A on the yellow paper distributed at today's work session. And I really think I should say something about 6-foot landscape.
So
Is there a
Setbacks and so
second
forth.
yet?
get a second on your motion.
Second.
Okay.
Second, okay. Okay, this would be requiring an 8-foot sidewalk. I'll just go through it really quickly. Require 6-foot landscape setbacks in addition to sidewalk. Limit building height to 10 stories. Limit building height for permitted uses located within 100 feet of R1, R2, or R3 to a maximum of 10 feet higher than the allowed building height in the adjacent residential zone. I think that's very important. Allow building height of up to 10 stories for development located within 100 feet of property zone R1, 2, 3, or if the applicant establishes that the proposed development will be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood through consideration of traffic impact, parking impact, solar shading, privacy impact, noise and lighting impacts, hours of operation, and other applicable impacts.
Okay, I have Claire in the queue and then Emily.
Thank you. So now that we have a motion on the table, here's some of the things I wanted to say. In addition to some of the other comments made around the table about how loaded up our planning department is and the goals we sent out in Envision Eugene, I am concerned that these proposed changes would be a restriction that would make development more difficult and end up costing our whole community more in many ways in terms of climate recovery, sprawl, loss of land outside the current UGB, while really, I think, offering little benefit in exchange for folks who live in the areas that would have the limitations. We just recently completed a long-awaited expansion of the MX out West 11th, which was a major investment of public resources, and this is an area that's primed to be a place for future mixed-use development, and I'm concerned that these types of restrictions would, again, limit those opportunities. And frankly, it's not clear to me what problem is being addressed. Public education is a worthy goal, I support it, but if this is a response to a specific project, Amazon Crossing has been mentioned, or because we weren't able to complete the planning on the South Willamette Special Area Zone and address some of the concerns there, such as some buildings can actually be taller, I don't believe this is the right way to go about trying to address those concerns. Being prepared to have the Planning Commission do an analysis of setbacks between C2 and residential zoning is something we should be planning for, and maybe a little more robustly than to be determined. It would help us to prepare as a community for this more dense development that we have made a commitment for. And I do think the River Road Santa Clara planning work will likely be able to inform some of that, since this is a place that has C2 abutting residential, and I know people are going to have opinions about how that plays out in that part of our community. So right now, as we are looking at this, this feels like looking backwards rather than looking forwards to what we need for our future of our community.
Thank you. Emily?
Thanks. Process question. If we put this forward and ask you to work on it, would we then, be able to, my problem is a lot of this I want to think about and get more information. So if we started an amendment process, would that part still be up for discussion, or would we be pretty much locked into this?
This would initiate the land use code amendment process. So this would be initiating, if this passes, it does initiate these specific amendments to the code. Now, that's the initiation of the process, so we'll go through the planning commission, you'll get a recommendation, and then it'll come to council. It's certainly, when it's before you, it'll be within your purview to change them. But it would start the process to make these specific changes to the code.
And that would give me a chance to learn more about them. Is there another way that we can address this besides this hugely time-consuming project? Can we address setbacks, or do we have to do it like this?
Do you mean getting more information about setbacks?
No, I mean, are there other ways to say, maybe we don't want to do this all of it, but like I said, the setbacks are really important to me. We change the rules about setbacks, or is that the same as doing this whole process?
You could, it would be different. That would be a much more limited code amendment process. So if you wanted to initiate a code amendment to require certain setbacks, you could certainly do that. And if it's something where you just simply wanted more information, but before you decided what exactly that code amendment you'd want to initiate, you could do that as well and just make a motion to direct staff to come back with information to then make a decision about initiating code amendments. So it's all within.
Would that be done if perchance this fails, to ask for another work session
Certainly.
For more information?
Absolutely.
And
Or we could put our new planning
different
commissioners to
ways
work.
to figure out how to address this that wouldn't be so onerous? Okay, thanks.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah, well, the setbacks, commercial setbacks is already an agenda item that's supposed to be brought back, maybe, and it's on the tentative agenda list, and we just never finished that conversation, so maybe that could be a priority, or maybe I should say high priority, for staff to bring that back and get it on the agenda.
Proximity of an important priority.
How about some new innovations?
New innovation.
Or something in close proximity to
Please
them.
bring some new innovations to the table. I'd be prepared to make an alternative motion when, after this one, if it should fail, to have staff and the Plan Commission look at these issues that we've discussed today, not just these, but the other ones that we've mentioned as well, and bring back the information analysis and the potential impacts at a future work session, as opposed to starting a land use code amendment process, which has a whole separate, different constraints around it and timelines and laws and things that I think the more appropriate way to go about this is to do it in a work session and have more conversation about this.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All in favor? 1. Opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it fails. Betty, you want to go on to the next one?
Sure. See if it's grammatically correct. I move to initiate the land use code amendment process to make the changes described in section B, which means, well, I need a second. Well, then if I don't get a second to that, I guess I can just talk about it. This was, if a traffic impact analysis is required for a development located within C2, require that the traffic impact analysis submitted by the applicant evaluate impacts of the proposed development on all transportation facilities located within 2 blocks of the proposed development and consider impacts to both AM and PM hour traffic. And this is really important, the traffic around the development. And we didn't get a second, so we won't vote on it, I guess. But that's what I'll go ahead to my next motion. I still have time.
Wait, Mike would like to comment.
I just wanted to make the point there, Betty, that if we had put that on as an item to vote on, we've already decided a number of pieces of this. We've already decided that the impacts to traffic are ones we're going to live with. We've already decided that. We lowered the overall standard that we're willing to live with from a D to an E. We've decided that we want to be more dense. We've decided we want to live with these impacts. I don't personally agree with them. I would not have voted, I didn't vote for the things that we've decided to do with regard to density and around Envision Eugene in the first place. But we've already decided, so we can't say now we're not actually going to build the things we plan to build because it's going to do what we already planned to do. And for that, I would absolutely vote no if we had that on the agenda.
Okay. Your third motion?
I'll skip that. It was just about, well, I can talk. I still had time anyway. But, okay, I'll see what it would have been. This is about determining whether the new uses C2 in the C2 zone are compatible and desirable when they're located in proximity to residentially zoned properties, and report back to council with their findings and conclusions. And I do think it's really important that we think about this, that we, those of you who don't want to do anything right now, will find that you've some very irate people if they are surprised by what's going in next to their homes. And I think the time to think about it is before it's too late. So I hope that we will have another discussion. I hope that you'll keep these papers, even with their error, this paper, even with the errors that are on there. And maybe we can ask for another discussion of those things, but I was hoping that something would come out of this discussion, out of this work session, that would protect people from undesirable effects, and especially surprising undesirable effects. Thank you.
Alan, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I wanted to make a motion. I move to have staff and the Planning Commission look at the issues that we discussed today, in particular setbacks and height, and bring back information analysis and potential impacts at a future work session.
Second.
All right. Okay, any discussion on that? Chris, Mike?
I would just be curious what kind of priority we place on it in terms of the workload we already have. I mean, this could be a pretty heavy lift with a lot of stuff. So I would say that's fine if we want to do that. It'd be nice if we can figure out how to answer a lot of these questions as part of the River Road work and see if we can't use that work to help answer a lot of these and provide that so we can kind of get double benefit for the work we're already doing. So I would hope that, and I'm fine voting for this, but I want it in the context of, let's not add a lot of additional work. Let's see how much of that we can incorporate into the work we're already doing so that we can be more thoughtful and deliberate about it. I think that would be good.
Mike?
Thank you. Mayor, I would hope that if we do have that conversation, which I sense we might, that we have this in a very connected way, that we start connecting dots to the work that we do so that people are better informed. In other words, I asked a question just a little while ago. If we start limiting C2, what does that mean to our obligation to have enough within our UGB? I think that one of the, the big joke all the time is the only thing a lot of people in Eugene hate worse than sprawl is density. And that rub always exists. But I don't think we have enough conversation about the trade-offs inherent in all of the decisions that we make. And saying, okay, that's great, we can protect in this way, but here's what state law then would require us to do to compensate for that under the law, or to compensate for the effects of that. So if we're going to have a conversation about how to downsize what you can do in C2, I hope we'll have the conversation as well that says, but in order to meet our objectives, that means we're going to need more C2 land to do it on, or whatever the implications of those decisions turn out to be in that, within the context of that rub. Thank you.
Okay, Greg, and then Betty.
I don't think we're going to get to our next agenda item. But I will say this. I do think, and heard what you said earlier, Mike, but I do think that there are a lot of people out there who do not consider right off the top when they buy their house, unless they're sitting up right next to a C2 zone or another zone, what they're necessarily getting into in a zoning way. I think that this gives us an opportunity to create at least have a conversation about an ordinance that would require zoning transparency in purchase and sale agreements. And that's regardless of whether that's residential or commercial development or industrial development, so that people are they know exactly what they're getting into before they get into it. I knew that I had houses and a park behind me before I bought my house, but and I did not know that the C2 zone was 12 blocks away from me necessarily, but I wasn't thinking about C2 zoning or any other kind of zoning. I was just thinking about, the houses that were around me, my proximity to schools, and my proximity to shopping. That was it. It wasn't, oh my God, I need to be closer to the C2 zone or further away from the C2 zone. So I think that at some point we need to, A, have that conversation and discussion in a longer format, and B, I would hope that this council would move to creating some kind of notification ordinance that would, enhance the, ability of property owners to, know exactly what they're getting into before they get into it.
Great. Betty, one more comment?
What if they put a strip club next door to you?
It's not zoned for that, Betty.
I don't know if that's C2 or not, but I wonder if anyone's looked at all the empty C2 property downtown. There is a lot of it. And I don't think we have a shortage of commercial property. There's a shortage of tenants to be in it at the present. And also, I don't know whether, when we said we had enough C2, whether that meant that it was barely enough or more than enough. And as for thinking ahead of things, it seems to me that when Appleby was built, we were asking people to build close to the sidewalk so that they would, and have parking behind. And then all at once they're too close because we want to expand the road. And we definitely do need to think about the consequences of what we do, but the consequences for residents as well as for government. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion on the table, correct?
No?
Yeah, it was seconded. All right, so ready to roll? Everyone in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 opposed. Oh, 8 in favor. And yes, manager.
Mayor, I just would like to address quickly on the capacity issue. We've talked about it, so I just don't want to leave any expectations on the table that this is going to come back anytime soon.
Before break?
Definitely. And I doubt it'll come back before the end of the calendar year. And so part of it is as Chris, I did appreciate your comments about if there's other work going on and this can also help or be a part of those kinds of efforts, that's where I think we will first try to do those kinds of things. Mike, your comment about impacts is a really good one, but that's a huge project. That's not like just a couple of hours of staff work.
I know.
And so I just don't want to leave the expectations that we're going to be back anytime soon around this specific item in isolation. It may be incorporated in some other kinds of work. So.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to most of us at the table, so thank you for that. And I think I apologize. We did not get to the second item at all, and so we'll have to reschedule that, and I apologize for that. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.